Welcome to the Soul Science Summit. I am your host, Felicity Doyle, and today I'm speaking with Nina Fry Kinzler. I hope I have that right.
Yep.
Nina is the Senior Designer of Experiential Programs at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, with her diverse background as a former holistic health professor at John F. Kennedy University, her training in mind-body medicine, and as a birth doula. Nina brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our discussion today. At IONS, Nina has been instrumental in creating and facilitating various programs, including the Possibility Accelerator Experience, the science-based process of manifesting your dreams, Noetics 101, the science and experience of interconnection, and the science of channeling, among all others. And so today we're going to be talking about the scientific whole person approach to manifesting. Thank you so very much for joining me today, Nina.
Thanks, Felicity. I'm just going to add a couple of things because I wanted to say that. So one of my roles at IONS is that I'm the science liaison. So I was actually on the science team for many, many years. And so I have this sort of distinct honor of taking the science and making it accessible. So that's really the thing. So I have this thing that I always ask, which is, I have done research for so many years, and we have these amazing scientists, and I know you were curious about Dean's work. And so what I like to do is to look at the research that we've done and the things that we've sort of created in terms of the science team, and then say, so what? So what? What does that mean in terms of our actual lives and the accessibility of that in terms of what we do? And so I just wanted to add that piece because I think it's a really important question for all of us to be asking, not just me, who's somebody who's, doing education in this, but, like when people are reading these things and are either IONS or other publications, so what does it mean to your actual life? And I think it's just something I wanted to put out there.
Yeah, I think that's so important because I think that's true. I think that one of the difficulties with a lot of spiritual ideas is that they do come across as being kind of inaccessible. Like even if you're looking at, the law of attraction, there's a lot of ideas about the law of attraction, and then when we try to apply it, it's just like, why isn't this working? Even though it seems like it comes across as a very simple idea, like attracts like and these different things or whatever, trying to pull these ideas into something that's a usable, viable process seems to be really difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's just get into it. So
Yeah.
so I'm curious for you to tell me, where are some places that you feel, because you've been doing a lot of interviews around manifesting, and I'd like to hear if there's some places that I can speak to that are kind of things that you haven't yet talked about yet, or things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that I'd really like to go into the two aspects that we kind of mentioned prior to our talk here, which is looking at the scientific end of it, understanding like how we're really like manifesting things through that scientific lens, and then also your specific focus on that and looking at the whole person approach, because I think that most people, and this is why I love that you brought this up, because I don't think most people think of it in that way, that it needs to be a whole person focus. So I love both of those ends of it, and however you want to talk about those, that'd be fantastic.
Yep. So I will get into the science first, just because I've spent so many years working with Dean and all of the other people, and we'll speak about that sort of as mind matter interaction. That's kind of how we talk about it at IONS. I also just want to address that this interview caused me to really want to rethink even how I think about manifesting. And so I've done a lot of on my own time, interviews with some people that I really respect in my life who've went to school with me, who, have been studying consciousness for a long time. And I've had the most fascinating conversations with people. And so I want to honor you for prompting those conversations. I actually invite people to have them. It just sort of changes your life to actually start asking these questions and really delve into these things and think about them, right?
I
Um,
love that. I love that so much that you've done that
oh
too. And
yeah,
I've actually had an interesting conversation. Somebody had posted on one of the posts on Facebook about the summit, and they were kind of naysaying the whole experience and going very sciencey about it. And I'm like, let's just use this as an opportunity, to have that conversation and to
yeah,
go into it. And by the end, we were both like, oh yeah, actually we do have the same perspective.
yes,
So it's
yeah,
fantastic. So I love the idea that you're having these deep conversations and
yeah, and
having new understanding about it.
totally. And I'm all about just growing and learning right now. And I want to also just like give a little shout out to Christopher Beisch, who you may or may not know. He was the actually the director of education at IONS for a period of time. But he's this incredible author who wrote The Living Classroom, and it's a place that I
Mm.
always teach from, which is that everybody has information to share. And so, what I want to say before I even start talking is what I'm sharing is somewhat of a collective, perspective. So, I just want to say that before I start. Um, so, let me get to the science. The science shows for sure that mind matter interaction is real. So,
Mm.
we've done enough research at IONS within very um, legitimate scientific research studies and one of the things that's interesting about ions is that we have to be very careful about being very strict with our protocols because there's a lot of skepticism around this kind of work, right? And so in order to be respected, in order to be um, even able to publish in journals that are, respectable journals, we have to be very clean and clear with our research. And so Dean is an amazing researcher. All of our researchers are. We have an amazing science team. Um, and so we've done enough research that shows, especially with the double slit experiment, that if that there is an effect of our observation and our thoughts on matter. Okay. So that's about the observer effect, right? Like, so if we're thinking certain things, it'll change the patterns that show up in um, the way that things show up in patterns with the double slit experiment. Okay.
So I think that there are certainly some of my audience that may be aware of the double slit and some of my audience that isn't aware. So if you feel like you want to go into that a little bit more,
Yeah.
you're welcome to.
So, I mean, the basic way to explain it is that the double slit experiment is where they basically shoot particles through multiple slits to onto a wall. I mean, it sounds like very simple, right? Um, but if we were basically to understand that we didn't have an impact, then every result of the way that the particles were to land on the wall would be completely random. But they're not. If we if we watch what happens when people are observing them or have or direct intention towards them, then we start to notice patterns. Okay. And another place that this also shows up is the random number generators. I don't know. Do you know about the, yeah. Okay.
I just did that. I just did that with Dr. Jeff Tarrant. He was one of the interviews that I did, and he's in Eugene with me. And I went over to his office, and he sat me down at the random number generator, and we did it together, and we tried different things.
Right. So there's,
Yeah,
I mean, so the double slit is like the sort of die-hard, long-term thing that we sort of look
yeah.
to in terms of mind matter interaction. But there's tons of other science that shows that is influence. And one of the other places that this shows up is the random number generators.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the Global Consciousness Project. I don't know if you know about that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the uh, people who runs that is a fellow at IONS. And they, for a period of time, they had random number generators all over the world. And they spit out, it's basically like a binary system that spits out, ones and zeros. And what they started to look at was what happens either before, and this is interesting, before or after big events. So let's talk about Earth Day or 9/11, right? And so they actually started to look at not just what would happen to the random number generators after these things, but actually before, because that starts to look at precognition,
Right,
right?
right.
So are people having precognitive awareness of something that's going to happen, even though they may not know what's going to happen, right? And so there's been quite a bit of research about that as well. And so the fact is, there's enough research at this point that shows that we have impact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even if it's not impact, it's awareness, right? And so then we kind of get to the so what. So what's the so what? What do we do with that information? Um, and I think so. I want to make sure that you feel like we've covered enough of the science.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, and we'll probably dive back into little pieces as we
Yeah,
go and
we
touch
can
things.
pivot
But
back
yeah,
and
no, I
forth.
love this. I love this so much because we're really, getting into the places where we're kind of touching into like quantum physics and how it touches into like the field of consciousness and things like that. So,
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
And then, so I think, one of the things that's just really come up for me recently is, um, and we talk about at IONS, like one of the things that I really want to address is that we talk about, um, there's both a receptive and a projective way that we interact with all of this information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um, we have this course that that my director of research and I teach together, Kirsten. That's called the Possibility Accelerator, and we talk about intention and attention, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
attention is about, are we paying attention to intuition, like the things that are coming in for us, the information that's coming in. And then there's also the projective piece. And that's I think what we more think about as manifesting. And I think that what is really important for us as humans is to really be thinking about this within context. So I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things that you said earlier is, I might be trying to manifest something and it's not happening. Why? Um, are we thinking about all of the parts of ourselves? Are we really considering all of the things? Because I also, when I taught as a holistic health educator, I talked a lot from I talked about this concept. I don't know if you've heard of it, but competing commitments. So that
No.
we may have multiple selves. We may have multiple eyes. We may have developed different eyes over time. And one of the things that I think is incredibly important to keep in mind is that all of them are protective. we're functioning to our best ability at every time of our lives, to the best of our ability.
Mm.
And sometimes we develop parts of ourselves and they may make a commitment to something that we may not even be conscious of now. So we may be trying to manifest something right now, and it may be competing with a part of ourselves that we previously committed to that we may not be conscious of. And so one of the things that I just really try to continuously come back to when we talk about manifesting, because I think it's a fairly complicated concept, is let's make the things conscious.
Mhm.
Where are you operating from? What part of yourself are you operating from? Are you operating from your current self? Are you operating from a part of your past self? You know, nobody can answer that but you. But I think people can get very frustrated with the concept of manifesting because it's very A to B. It's
Yeah.
very, let's do this and we get this.
Yeah.
And even one of my friends, so I'll just give a shout out to one of my friends who made an excellent point about manifesting, that sometimes we're acting from a place of desperation, right? A lot of times when we try to manifest, we're acting from a place of desperation. Is that a bad thing? No,
No, but it
it's
does
not.
make things more complicated for sure, because I think
Right.
that a lot of times we're coming from a place of fear and scarcity, desperation, all those things. And so then we're also bringing in trauma and,
Exactly.
all those things are creating constriction on our desires. And then, and that, I mean, there's so many different aspects. Like, this is why I think manifesting is so frustrating. I actually wrote down a list of like 40 plus different like do's and don'ts, because when it comes to manifesting, it's like, you know think lightly about this but not too intensely about this, but a little bit about, and it's just like you have to find like it's like the perfect window of letting go of like your fears, your past traumas, all the different things. And so that's why it gets so complicated.
Yeah, if you're honest with yourself,
Yeah.
and I think that that's, in from my perspective,
Mm.
it's the only way that real manifesting actually works. And the other thing is, manifesting or intention doesn't necessarily show up how you want it to. And
Yeah.
so then are you willing to accept what shows up? Because it's not always pretty. It's not always, you can imagine whatever it is that you want to have happen, but what shows up may be greater than what you could have imagined, but it could hurt. It could, you know, create other things in your life. And so are you willing to be open to that? And I think that's also the receptivity part, right? So that's again what we talk about at Ions is the projection, the receptivity. It's it's a two-sided experience. And um and so we've also talked a lot at Ions, and we're actually going to be developing, and I'm very excited to develop this. It's going to be very fun to develop this about discernment.
Mm.
So discernment is a very critical piece, I think, to all of this, because we um we are not used to information that comes in from beyond our five senses, or beyond space and time,
Yeah.
right? We're not trained how to, they train us out of that, actually, from the time we're
Hmm.
little, to be not used to that. And so when we start getting this information, the very first thing is, do I trust this? Do I know where it came from? And that's one of the big questions that people get a lot of the time. And we have, I don't know if you know about our Noetic signature inventory at IONS, but it's basically this inventory that we take that just trying to understand how do people take information in, because it's
Mm,
really different. And we believe that everybody has their own way of doing it, and that it's really important to teach people that we're not gurus. We can't
right.
teach anybody, this is the way you receive information from beyond space and time. You are the person who knows. And
Right. Yeah,
so,
the Noetic signature, right? And that's what
yeah,
you're talking about.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
everybody, it's like a thumbprint. You
Mm,
have your own noetic signature. And what is that? And can you
yeah.
learn to trust that?
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much because that's one of the things that I teach too. And I love to explain, so we're talking about like essentially these psychic or energetic senses, right? And
Right.
trusting this information. And I think that a lot of people look to these things as like a phenomena, like, wow, this thing is miraculous and only some people are like born with this experience or whatever. And I like to bring it back to looking at it as a sense, but in so much as like our physical body has physical senses, right? Well, our
Exactly.
energetic body has energetic senses like the physical senses. And so like when you're in your energetic body, you're interpreting and receiving energetic information through those energetic senses. And then I like to explain it like, when you're eating a meal with your physical body, and you're tasting and smelling, and you're not just tasting or you're not just smelling, right? You're doing the whole experience. And so I think that when we have our energetic senses working, that they're doing the whole experience too through all of our senses. It's just that we learn to kind of isolate them. And
Right.
if we learn to start opening up to all of them and realizing that they're all activating, but they're all activating at different levels. And so like if I'm using my visual energetic sense more than my auditory or
Mhm.
vice versa, then the whole picture is going to manifest differently. So your noetic signature, as you put it, is going to be very different than mine because I'm using my abilities very differently.
Exactly. And then, yeah, and then we get to the piece of discernment, right? So the
Yeah.
information comes in, and then what do you do? Do
Yeah.
you do you trust it, right? Because as we've already talked about, is, we're trained out of trusting noetic information. We just started,
Mhm.
and that's the language we use at IONS, is noetic information. But energetic information, or all of
Well,
that
I
stuff.
like noetic because I think it has the scientific edge that you're really needing. You know what I
Right.
mean? Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so, and then even one step beyond that, so do you trust it? And then what do you do with it? Right. So that's the piece that we're going to be writing some curriculum on, which I think is very exciting, because I think it's, uh, it's sort of the cutting edge of where, and I'll just use this language, and it's sometimes language I really hate to use, but I think people have felt very closeted in terms of their noetic connections.
Yeah.
It's very hard for people to come and be honest about it. And we just had our conference, and one of the things, I was sort of on the ground at that conference. I was sort of behind the scenes doing booths and tables. And what I noticed was people just were sort of desperate for the connection, just being able to talk about this stuff, right? And we are lucky because we work at IONS. And so all of our colleagues we're sort of just steeped in it all the time. But I think we sometimes can forget
Hmm.
that not everybody gets to be honest about this stuff. And there are ways in which we don't feel safe
Yeah.
talking about these things with even the closest people in our lives, our families, our friends, things like that. And so I think that's a place where we want to kind of start opening that door. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to, even if it's just like a private space that you have, with other ions people, or, people like you, or these kinds of spaces. But I think it's really important to have that sense of safety and capacity to explore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think, like, because you use the language that you do, I think that that's really important because it makes it safer. I was actually talking with another speaker, like, I think it was yesterday, and she was talking about how when we move it into more of a scientific realm, it makes it feel safer, that you can talk about it more, because when it's in that spiritual side, it's kind of in that woo-woo department for a lot of people,
Yeah.
that it really scares them to, like, talk about it or admit it. And this is why I kind of put together the summit, because I want to combine the two and I want to normalize it. I want to create that environment where people, this isn't like a phenomenon, it is, and when I was talking with Halana in her interview, and just talking about how we can really just begin to create this as a normal conversation that we can all have, because, like you said, people are having these experiences, and we need to be able to talk about these experiences, because then if we're not talking about it, we're not able to use these approaches. So we're not going to be able to manifest and do these things or understand how to do these things if we can't feel comfortable talking about these things.
Yeah, and I think Helene has done such a beautiful job. I mean, I've been so impressed with her. I mean, obviously her book is amazing. Um, and but I think she's done a really beautiful job of marrying the science and the experience,
Mm,
right? And I've worked very closely with Helene for years now, and so I love the way that she's done that. I think she's very special in that respect. She's able to do it very well, and I think that's the important piece, is because I think that whether it's right or wrong, um, and to be completely honest, I don't necessarily think that our science has reached the place that it needs to be to fully explore these ideas. And I'm hoping, like, that some of the evolution of what's going to happen next is that the science sort of expands to get to the place where it actually can adjust to these phenomenon, and actually and really research them in a way that encompasses them. Because right now what's happening, I've been in science for so long, since I was in my early 20s, that the science is, it's still kind of old school,
mm,
and um, the way that we're doing scientific explorations are still based on older models. So I'm hoping that that's going to expand. And I think it will. I think that there's a push for that to happen. Uh, but I think in the meantime, if we can provide enough science for people to really be talking about this, and so it's sort of twofold, right? So I think there's the science supports people to talk about it, and then people talking about it also influences the science. And so I talk about that a lot at ions. So we're trying to have a sort of a process where we get information back from people about their experiences, and then that influences the science that we do, right? Because I think that's important, that both are influencing each other, because experience and science are intertangled, whether we want to admit that or not.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think so for sure. And I agree with you what you're saying about the relationship between them, that they can both help each other, because the science aspect of it seems like it doesn't want to allow for the opening of learning more about, the spiritual side of things,
Right.
and yeah, yeah,
Well, it's a difficult, I mean, I think if you were to just look at it from this sort of strictly scientific perspective, spirituality would look very sloppy,
yeah.
you know?
Well, I think it's quantum physics, it seems to be like the first one that is able to start to explain these things,
Right.
whereas before, like, nothing would make room for it. And so I think that's why quantum physics has like gotten so successful, especially in the spiritual community, because then it's starting to explain like things like consciousness and the field and, manifestation and, how, things can happen, at the same time in two different sides of the world or whatever. And so, quantum entanglement and, all these things. And I love that. I love that we're at a place that we are starting to have an explanation for these things.
Yeah. Well, and I think back to your point about having the science be a place that can validate people's experiences. I think people's spiritual experiences all often feel very sloppy,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't necessarily follow any sort of protocol, and science is all about protocol. Um, but they don't follow protocol. They're sort of this that you sort of feel like you're going rogue and you're having these experiences and what's happening to me, or even if they're little tiny things, you can have little tiny um spiritual experiences and those can feel weird and like they don't fit into your life, or you can have huge spiritual experiences and those can kind of wreak havoc on your life sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
well, I think that the science has a hard time like explaining those things,
mhm,
but I think that the science it's really good. And the way that I like to use the science is, and the way that you're also using the science is like observing the experiences
right.
and notating the experiences. And so that's what I like to do, like when I'm teaching people to like develop their abilities. I'm like, be the inner scientific observer, because when you start like observing and validating and being like, okay, well, this is where I'm noticing it, in my mind space. And then, if I'm hearing something over here versus over here, is this my own inner voice or is this like guidance? And then as you start to be the scientific observer of that experience, then it's easier to say next time, oh, well, that was my guidance or that was my inner voice, and so that's where I really think that, science excels.
Yeah. Do you know the concept? I mean, I'm sure you've heard this probably 1,000 times, but the citizen scientist. You've been.
Actually, no, I
Oh, you have.
haven't. Please
Okay.
tell me
Yeah. So
about
we
that.
started.
No.
So our current CEO, Claudia Wells, she likes that term, and I really sort of delved into what that meant. Uh, because I think it's actually a really important concept. I think we sometimes hold, so obviously the scientists at our organization, they all have PhDs. They're very skilled in all the protocols you have to do and all of those things. But I think that the whole issue of the citizen scientist is interesting because it's a paradigm shift. It's kind of what we have been talking about, which is you are your own expert,
Mm,
right? So it's taking the science and using it in the way that you need to, and maybe using science that scientists who have PhDs and have done the research and all have done that hard work, and saying if someone says to you, I don't understand what you're talking about, you had this experience and it doesn't make any sense to me, you could say, okay, well, there's this research that shows that this is a legitimate experience that a lot of people have had and all those things. But there's something else that's happening, which is this paradigm shift, which is how do you really become your own researcher? How do you really shift? Because I think we spend a lot of time wanting other people to give us answers. I think we want to. I mean, it's much easier when someone else can give us answers, but it also isn't easier
Yeah.
in a way, So I think that there's this way in which, especially with our education at IONS, we're trying to write all of our curriculum from that place of how do you become your own expert? How can you really learn how to trust yourself and to lean into these experiences? Use the research to support yourself. Use whatever it is that you need to support these experiences. But we can't tell you what is, what's happening with you, or what your noetic signature is, or how you use that information. How do you discern it? How do you figure out where it's coming from? How do you then use it in your own life? How do you do that for yourself? And there is so much power in that when you can actually go there, when you can actually sit in that place with yourself, and it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable. But I think if I were to sum up, kind of what we're doing in our experiences, we call it the experience department. It's not education, but we call it the experience department because it is all about experience, is we're trying to foster that place in people.
Mm. Well, I think that's the most important place, because even if you're receiving information, if you're in that receptive place, or you're trying to use that information in that projective place, if you're not trusting that, if you're not like paying attention to and trusting that information, then it's completely unusable. So, oh my God.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm such a cat person. I had to kick my kittens out. Well, I didn't kick them out. I fed them treats downstairs. That's how you kick them
Nice.
out.
Yeah, she always gets a little concerned because she thinks that I'm talking to myself, and she'll come up and be like, "What's wrong with
Okay.
you?"
Fair.
Yeah, totally fair. But yeah, I think that the biggest problem, and this is what I find, like when I coach and work with people, is that they don't trust their information that they're getting. And then how can you use that information if, well, twofold, I guess. You don't trust it, but you also don't notice it. Like there are aspects of you don't,
You
because
don't
you blame
notice
it
it.
on other things, because the subtle senses are subtle, right? And so you blame it on, it's my imagination, or it's this, or it's that. It's not really there. I don't really have those things. You have to be born with those things, or whatever the thing is. And then, okay, yeah, my intuition is screaming at me, don't do this, don't do that, but I'm not listening, because how do I know that that's the right information?
Right, right. So I think, to your point, one of the things that we've been talking about quite a bit about this next level of curriculum development that we're going to do is it is twofold.
Yeah.
The very important thing is the attention. Are you able to be receptive and take it in? And for a lot of people, that's really scary. And
Yeah.
that's okay that it's scary, because it's, again, getting us out of our own way in terms of all the things that we've been trained about. And then, so you get the information, and then what do you do? And that's, you know, um, as I said, there's just a lot of untraining that has to happen there. We are, I mean, I think everyone's heard this, that little kids are so good at this. right? Their imaginations run wild, and good for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And so much of manifestation and intention is just imagination.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I've noticed, like because I mean, like if you have I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but it's like when I have a block about manifestation, like I usually notice it when I can't imagine something. So if I can't imagine myself in like the desired outcome of what I'm trying to manifest or whatever, it's usually because I have a block about that, or a fear, or a trauma, or whatever the
Right,
thing. I have a limiting belief structure or
right.
something. And so I love that it comes down to like the simplicity of, well, I can't imagine it, then therefore I need to find what's blocking me.
Right, and I think that just to get back to this whole idea of the competing commitments is the one of the things that I just really learned from that perspective, and that I love this in my own life, and I just love teaching it too, is we really are trying to take care of ourselves all
Mm.
the time. And I think that we can get into language around, I'm self sabotaging, or I'm, blocking myself, or I'm this or that or the other. But the fact is, if you can really look into what's happening, and so whatever part of yourself might be having a trauma response, or a, um, any sort of thing where you're sort of saying no to that right now, but
Mm.
really looking into that from a perspective of kindness and compassion and empathy. Oh, this is a part that I even that maybe I established years ago. Maybe I established it last week, but I'm not conscious of it. You know, but it's a part of me that's important. And I think that's also a really important piece, because I think the other thing that happens around this stuff is we can kind of say, "Oh, I have to just push through this," and why am I self sabotaging? I don't think that that's. I just don't think it's helpful. I just personally, I don't think it's helpful. Maybe for some people that really works, but in my own life, I haven't found it to be so. I haven't found. I mean, I've taught for gazillion years at this point, and with my students, when I teach them this kind of perspective, it feels like a more like it goes back to the title of this talk, a whole person perspective. Let's take the whole part, all the parts of you, into account when you're thinking about this.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important, because if we are, criticizing ourselves or saying, well, we're blocking ourselves purposefully, or we're doing these things or whatever, it's like you're creating this like inner sense of conflict about manifesting. And I love your approach, because when you're looking at, competing commitments, it's like you're all for the things that you're wanting to manifest. You just may have conflicts in the desires, and so
Right.
it's all a positive focus versus a, I'm broken and I'm negative and I'm focusing this way and I'm doing the wrong thing, or I'm working against
Exactly.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah, and my whole thing when I work with people around competing commitments is I say, like, let's bring them all to the surface, and then, like, let's see if we can get them all met, or maybe you're ready to let them go. Who knows?
Mm.
You might be ready to let them go, but you are not going to know until we bring them to the surface and see what's actually going on. And yeah, so that's sort of my approach.
Well, I think it's a great one. It actually reminds me of hypnotherapy. We used to do these. I don't know if you're trained in
I,
hypnotherapy, but
I'm a
are
hip
you?
I'm a hypnobirthing person.
Okay, yeah, that's right, that's right. Yeah. So, and they have this process, it's called about like the boardroom, and bringing like the all the alter egos and
Yeah,
aspects of yourself into the boardroom. And so everything that you're talking about just reminds me of that, because it's such a powerful tool,
it is.
like to bring all aspects of yourself in and have that conversation. Because it reminds me of, like, when you bring, like, the judge or the critic or all these things that we look at ourselves and go, well, that's bad. That's the bad part of ourselves. But then you realize the judge is just trying to help you out. The critic is just trying to help you out. And they're
That's
just
right.
doing it in the ways that they understand.
Right.
And then if you have that internal conversation with each of those parts of yourself and be like, how are you trying to help me? And then how is this kind of like a little misinformed or a little misdirected, not in a bad way, but just in a how can we redirect this so that we're all having the same focus and the
Right.
same intention.
Or if it's not current, right? That's the
Yeah,
other thing is these may be things that we committed to sometimes when we were even little,
yeah,
you know? So is it still current? And if it's not, can I let it go? But maybe I can, and that's okay too.
no. No, definitely.
Mm.
So let's go to a simple part of manifesting. What are the aspects of manifesting that, what am I trying to ask here? Um, like the steps that you would encourage people to go through if they're trying to like bring something into fruition. What are some steps that you encourage through that manifestation process?
So it's a great question. I hadn't thought about this ahead of time. Let me think
Ah,
about it.
sorry,
I might do a
sorry.
little bit of my looking up to the sky, which is what
Just
I do,
riff.
and
Yeah,
thinking.
just riff. You're good.
I think I think it's a really important question to ask where we are trying to manifest from. I think that actually has to be the first question.
Mm,
So, is it that we're manifesting from a place of desperation? Because if we are, that's okay. But also, sometimes it's about sitting with the desperation,
mm,
right? So, and then I think we just, I think that there are some, there's nothing that I have to say about manifesting that's all that different than I think what other people would say, other than I think that we underestimate our imaginations and we're manifesting all the time. We're
yeah,
manifesting all the time. So we don't, it's not necessarily this process of sitting down in your yoga chair or whatever else. And I don't say that from a place of you need to monitor your thoughts. That is
right.
so not my jam. I do not do that. But what are you imagining all the time? And so if you're setting a goal for something, what are the other things that you're also imagining all the time, right?
Yeah,
That may or may not align with that. So are you really aligned with this thing that you uh, that you're wanting to manifest? And here's the other thing. This is another thing that I think is really important. How will your life change if you manifest this?
mm,
How will your life change? Because manifesting changes things in really powerful ways, big ways,
yeah.
huge ways.
And I think that can actually limit the potential for manifesting because I think we're oftentimes like terrified of change.
Right. We
You
are
know?
terrified of change.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something. Can I just tell you something really personal that happened to me? I don't know if we're over time.
No, we're good. We got as much time as you want. Like we can go on for hours and I won't even care.
So I had this really intense experience last year where my best friend died. She died
Wow.
really suddenly.
Wow.
13 days from, she was 46. She died of cancer. She shouldn't have had cancer. Like, there was no reason why. Um, it changed me in a
Wow.
way that I have never experienced in my entire life. And then my whole life changed right? So I'm trying to process all the ways that, that's how that changed me. So I had the grief. Obviously, that was really, really hard. I'm still going through it.
Mm.
Uh, but it also just stripped away so much of the stuff that gets in the way, right? That gets in the way. I think it just sort of, she was absolutely incredible human being.
Mm. I'm so
I was
sorry.
so lucky to have her. Um, and then I had to get used to, oh wow, she's gone, and now I have to get used to life without her. And so getting used to all that. And so do I like change? No, I don't like change. I taught
Yeah.
classes when I was a professor about the challenge of change. Nobody likes change. I don't like it. I didn't like losing
Nobody,
her.
nobody. Yeah.
But it has been illuminating to watch myself have to push myself through a change that I couldn't control.
Mm.
Right? So we have changes we can control, and then there's changes we can't control. And I think that one of the things that gets really tricky with manifesting is that it is actually change that we can control,
Yeah.
but there's parts of us that don't want it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
I like that you're talking about that though, and really looking at, the outcome of that and how is that going to change my life? Because if you're starting to go through that process of manifesting and things are shifting, and then you start to like experience the outcome of that, and you're like, whoa, I don't want that, never mind, abort the mission. It's like you need to really think about, how is this going to change your life?
right. And then the question is, or do I really want that? Right? So
Mm.
then there's that other piece too of sort of, there's the secondary, tertiary changes that happen.
Mm.
But we like to think, I mean, manifesting, and this is the thing that, one of the things I was going to say in the beginning is, it's been so commodified. And it's this sort of, let me manifest this, and then this is going to happen, and I'm going to get my thing, and all this. No, we are very complex humans, and it all has to be taken in within context. And even, one of my friends that I spoke to about this, when I was talking to you in the beginning about this sort of like collective education that I've been experiencing from my friends, she's very much into social justice. And she said, one of the big struggles that she has with manifesting is around the social justice issues. And,
Mm.
people cannot necessarily manifest themselves out of lack of health care, or, lack of access to funds. Maybe they can. I'm not sure. Uh, but the human experience is very complicated. And I think if we start to commodify things the way that manifesting has been commodified, we get into trouble. And so I think we need to keep backing it up and saying, what what is this? What is the context? What, as humans, how are we experiencing this as individual humans, but also as a collective? Because, Ion's guiding hypothesis is that everything is interconnected.
Mm.
So we're manifesting things for ourselves, for the collective.
Mm.
How is that impacting the collective good?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's important. I think it's important to start looking at the collective. I was talking with Dr. Goswami, and, he's doing the quantum activism, which I
Yep.
love so much, because I think that it's really time for us to think not just about, like, as we talk about manifesting, not just the things that we want to manifest in our own lives, but how are we going to manifest, a better society? How are we going to be activists towards putting our intention and attention towards, creating a better world for everyone? And like you said, with commodity, and I can't say the word now. My tongue's like,
Yeah.
forget it. But yeah, that we need to think about those things. And again, like you said, about we're always manifesting, whether we are conscious of it or not. Generally we're unconscious manifestors, as we're just putting, our awareness towards things, our predominant thoughts towards things or whatever, and we're not really thinking about what are our predominant thoughts, what are we actually putting our attention and intention towards, and then deciding to become conscious about those things. And also, like you said, the limitations and the parameters of where we are in society, and like I'm in a certain position in my life where I have a certain amount of limitations. That can I completely manifest myself out of those things? In certain ways, absolutely, and maybe in more ways than I expect, possibly. But, I think also being realistic about the potential limitations of manifestation as a tool.
Well, and I think, to your point that, I mean, this is something I ran into so much when I was in the health world, in part because I I took care of all three of my parents when they were dying of cancer,
Oh,
right? So a big part of where some of this, my study of this came was because I was the primary caregiver of three people that were dying of like terminal cancer.
wow.
And so I had intentions
Yeah.
that I wanted to become true. Uh, they had their own intentions that they wanted to become true. And then you have to sort of look into all the things that we've talked about, sort of
Mm,
where do the limits, so there's personal intention, there's where did my intentions interact with theirs, but
mm,
also what is simply reality.
mm.
And someone like my friend who passed away, if I could have wished, imagined her cancer to be gone, Lord, believe me, I would have done it in a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
But where do you sort of, where's that line? Where's the line? And I think it's a really important question for everybody.
Yeah. No, and I think that's what, like, the limitation again to the law of attraction is, because a lot of people will read those books and think, oh, it's really easy. And I just put my intention and I just changed my world and I got cars and I got money and I got all these things or
Yeah,
whatever. And I mean, certainly people have the possibility of doing that, especially if they don't have a lot of attachment to that. And maybe they're better off in society in certain ways, that their attachment to money is very, like, fluid and easy, so I think this is why I really like your whole person approach, because you have to really look at, like, the aspects of the self to think about, like, do I have that free flowing, like, relationship with money? Am I in a position in life that abundance in the ways that I want it can come to me easily? Do I have certain, limitations, blocks, situations in my life or things? And so, do I have different aspects of myself that are competing, in their commitments, and things like that, and really looking at all these things and going, okay, now let's get all of these things on board and let's focus, as much of our attention and intention as we can towards that, have a clear outcome of what we're wanting and that we feel good about that outcome, and then open ourselves up for even more, like even a better outcome than what we even expect.
exactly. Well, we don't even know. I mean, one of my friends said, we have no idea what's actually possible. We try to
Right.
use our imaginations, and there's so much more that could be even possible. And can our ego let go enough to let that be so
Yeah.
and be okay with what that looks like? So there's a lot of letting go, I think. I think there's a lot of, we think about manifesting as a very intentional activity, but I actually think there's a lot of letting go that actually has to take place. So,
I agree with you 100%. And I think that that relates very much to the stories that you told, and how hard those shifts are, because it's not just about having that intention and like moving towards those things. It's about a complete shift in your consciousness as a whole and your life, and it's like you're becoming that person that has that outcome that you're wanting. So it's not just about, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's not just about like shifting into that reality as if you're the same person. You're going to be a very different person. And like you said, an aspect of that is letting go of your old self, mourning your old self. I mean, I'm going through that right now with the aging process, right?
oh,
And like, goodbye old self,
that's a whole
and
other thing. Yeah, that's a whole
I
other
know,
podcast like interview we could do.
totally right. We'll have to do that one next. But yeah, but I mean, and then how am I manifesting, right? As an older person, and being okay with like a very different reality that I'm manifesting now versus the reality that I would like to manifest.
Right. And I think, one of the things that I think I've started to realize recently is I just keep asking myself, what is real? What's
Mm,
real? Right? Let me get down to what's real. And I might not like it. It might be uncomfortable. It might not be exactly what I want, but what's real? Because I need to be functioning from that place.
sure.
And if I can even manifest from that place, I'm a leg up. Because if I'm functioning from a place of desperation or neediness, or as my one friend said, grabbiness, which I thought was a really cool, like, grabbing all the things, um, that's not a place I want to be functioning from. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve anything or anybody. So we have to ask the questions.
Yeah. I think that's exactly where it's at. And I think you've, like, I'm trying to say, nailed it in the, you know, accepting like where you are,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't move forward into a new reality if you're not accepting the present moment as it is. Because when you don't accept the present moment, you're in a state of like resistance, and you know what I mean, and that state of resistance is blocking your ability from moving forward. But then if you release the resistance, accept the moment, and then hold the intention and the focus to move forward, and all the other things that you're talking about, it feels like then you can start to move forward because the resistance isn't there anymore.
It's funny that you brought up the word resistance, and I think I'll end on this just because I have to jump off in
Yeah.
a second.
Yeah,
But
you know, yeah.
I wrote my entire thesis. My thesis was called Resistance is a Gateway to Change,
Mm,
because I actually had this whole intuition download that got sort of downloaded to me from the ethos or whatever, that was about that's what we have to do, is we have to look at the resistance is there for a reason. So how do we embrace that, and how do we, we don't have to be sort of slamming it down like whack-a-mole. That's what we do in this culture,
yeah.
right? Is let's
Yeah.
get rid of it, but it'll pop up somewhere else. It will, right? So
100%.
how do we embrace that part of ourself that's resisting something because it's probably taking care of us?
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And then also embrace, like, moving forward. We got to do it all at the same time. We don't like to. It's a lot of work.
Right? Yeah, I know. It's all
but
a lot of work. They
but
want it to be
honestly,
easy.
it
Yeah.
is where the power comes from. It's the power comes from embracing all of ourselves and sort of saying, I want to move forward. I've got this stuff that's going on. It's legit. Let me take a look. What's happening?
Hmm.
That's my theory.
I love it. So as we step away from this interview, what are some like last like insights, tips, or guidance that you want to offer the audience about, the whole person scientific aspect of manifesting?
Yeah, so I would just say that I think the science is real, for sure. There's no doubt. There's been so much of it, either, but from ions or other organizations that are our colleagues, that manifesting is a real scientific phenomenon that shows evidence that it's real. And that said, I think my very significant takeaway is that it all has to be taken within context. So work with it within context. Work with it with yourself. Work with it within your cultural perspective. Ask questions of yourself about where you are in terms of where you're operating from when you're manifesting, but don't stop believing that it's true. It's true. It works. I mean, it is a real phenomenon. So that's what I would say.
I love that. I love it so much. Well, I want to thank you so much, Nina, for being here with me today. This has been so incredible.
It has been great. And let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. We got to have more talks for sure.
For sure. We'll do the next one on aging.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
All right. Well, take good care. And thank you for putting this together. As I said, I learned so much just, from it. Really facilitated a lot of learning for me. And I love that.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, thank you, audience, for watching. Again, I am Felicity Doyle, your soul alignment coach, and this was Nina Kinzler talking about a scientific whole person approach to manifesting. And I will see you all in the next interview.